Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. Aloha! This is Mimi Chan, and I am excited to be hosting Culture Chat Kauai Comic Con edition for the second time. I have two incredible comic creators here with me today, Greg Rucka and David Walker. Greg Rucka is a New York Times best-selling author of hundreds of comics and nearly 24 novels. His career has included critically acclaimed and Eisner-winning award works such as Batman, Wonder Woman, Queen and Country, and Lazarus. He is also the writer for the comic and hit film The Old Guard, starring Charlize Theron. David Walker is an award-winning comic book creator, writer, author, filmmaker, journalist, and educator. His work in comics includes Shaft, Luke Cage, Occupy Avengers, Power Man and Iron Fist, Naomi, and the Eisner Award-winning Bitter Root. Thank you, Greg and David, for joining me on Culture Chat.
Thank you. Is this Culture Chat? Culture Chat Hawaii, right?
It's still Culture Chat, but this is the Kauai Comic Con edition. They specifically reached out and said, we love Culture Chat and we love your guests. Can you please bring them along? And I said, I will beg them. And and you guys were so gracious to comply and be here, and we're super psyched.
I missed the begging part, but okay.
Oh, come on now. Well, we pretty much are going to pretend and put on our thinking and imagination caps that we are on one of those beautiful Hawaiian islands, because as I know, the three of us are not, but one day we shall be there, but we will put it into our imagination. Hawaii is a really beautiful place. Have either of you ever visited before?
Yeah.
Yep, I've been there. It's one of my favorite places. One of my favorite places I've ever been. So I look forward to going back.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
I took the kids out to Kauai summer before last. It was their first honest to God vacation we'd had in forever. And spent about a week. And I think the last time I'd been was like 20 years prior. So things were different.
Yes. Yeah.
Things had changed.
I'm sure. Yeah. And so you specifically, Greg, you went to Kauai.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Because that was my first time to Hawaii last year when I was invited to Kauai Comic Con, and I was so thrilled. I thought it was amazing. And they're so wonderful there, and they describe themselves on Kauai as like the country islanders because it's not as crazy as Honolulu and some of the other islands. So I found it to be very, very charming and laid back, and lots of fun things to do. Did you guys like surf or anything crazy like that?
Oh God, no.
I've gone snorkeling a couple times, and each time it's gotten progressively better. But the first time I went, I was pretty sure I was going to be one of those statistics that the Hawaiian Tourism Bureau never talks about. Just swept out to sea.
Yeah, I got cured of snorkeling when I was 13.
Okay.
I went snorkeling in the Red Sea.
Oh.
And I was young and loving it, and it was gorgeous. And oh, look, the fish. And then I saw, I don't know if it was a manta or a devil, but it was a ray. And when you see them for real, not like behind glass, but when one of them is like, "Hey, I see you,"
yeah,
you realize that there is like that whole John Carpenter alien. Other entity, the thing,
right? The abyss.
It comes from a real place. It comes from you are not for this environment. This is an other creature. And my father, may he rest in peace, described me coming out of that water like you'd never seen anybody run that fast. Like I was, boom, and that was it. I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm not. I breathe air. That's what I do. So when we went to Kauai, we spent a lot of time. Actually, I ran a lot, which was fun. Did a little swimming in the water with the kids,
just to where it was safe.
Yeah, but mostly sat around by the pool and read. Which, like I said, it was the first vacation I'd been on since 2007.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I practically didn't know what to do with myself. It was really nice.
You're like, what am I doing? This is what's happening. Oh,
Yeah.
wait, it's relaxation. I'm
Yeah.
confused. Yeah, it's true. It takes like, especially for us that go, a couple days to unwind and finally start to enjoy the vacation once it,
Mhm.
begins. It's hard to just kind of switch gears. But yeah, we, Oscar and I went out and we loved it. We loved every second, and we definitely wish we were there. Unfortunately, this year does not
We're
throw
virtually
us.
there.
We're virtually there, though.
there.
We are virtually there, and hopefully next year it'll be better, and we can all go and snorkel from the shoreline together.
Or watch David go.
Right. Well, actually, I'm with you. So I have this very love-hate relationship with sharks. Like, I cannot stop watching all things sharks, but I refuse to scuba dive. I'm like, have this unbelievable fear, like, to where when I was younger, like getting into a pool was even an issue because I thought maybe a shark could show up, so, but I am obsessed with them. Like, I can't stop watching. So I have that same thing as you, Greg, where I'm like, they own the water. That's their domain, and they have a right to it. Like, I feel I'm invading. So I'm with you on that. So we will watch David and cheer him on.
Yeah, I'll cheer you on, buddy.
It's no, I don't. I'm terrified of it too. But the truth is, it's less terrifying than, say, like skydiving, and I can't face that fear. But like because I can swim and I know how to get by, and like deep sea diving and stuff like that, I could never imagine doing that. And I don't know if I could ever do scuba, although I'm just curious enough that I might try it. But yeah, no, it's
the only way I would do scuba, I think I would absolutely do it if I needed to research it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I was writing something,
here come the writers.
I need to know how to do this. I would learn how to scuba dive. Right? Like, I learned how to ride a motorcycle so I could write it. I learned how to play guitar so I could write it.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain things you cannot fake.
Okay.
The internet will not let you fake them. You can get away with a lot of travel these days, never having to leave your home. Because you can find the stuff on YouTube, and if you get the right travel guides and so on, you can educate yourself very well. And and between that and Google Maps, and YouTube, people posting videos of driving through a city or whatnot, you can. I have been all over the world from the comfort of this very office doing that.
I think many of us have been at this point.
but there are certain things, I think, especially in prose, where having gotten your hands on it, you learn, you acquire the correct details that can make or break the legitimacy of what you're claiming to be writing about. So there may well be a reason why I will never write a story where somebody has to jump out of a plane, because I don't want to learn how to do that. I was once asked in an interview, what's the worst thing your parents think you have done? Not that you have done, but think you have done. And my response was heroin. Because of a novel that I had written that had come out. I was pretty sure they thought, like, okay, he's done heroin now. So
that is great.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I know I was going to say, because I always say my favorite form of procrastination is research.
Yeah.
And so I will constantly research the hell out of something, and there are some stuff where it's like, oh, I should do this before I really, it's interesting, because I was just going through some boxes of stuff yesterday.
So we noticed on your Instagram.
Yeah. and I'm finding all these comics that I created when I was between the ages of, say, like 10 and 15, and they're terrible, but the interesting thing, it's the worst part of them isn't the drawing's bad or the writing's bad. It's that I can see that, I didn't have any experience yet. I hadn't experienced the world, and that's the thing that drives me nuts. I'm like, And so I'm actually writing something about that now, about, the conversation between the adult me versus the kid me. And, I watched a lot of Charles Bronson movies when I was a kid. So it's like, I see this in my, between Charles Bronson and X-Men, that's everything I did as a kid, as a wannabe writer.
But that's how we all start, man.
Yes, exactly.
You don't start writing because you go, I have a story. You start writing because you have encountered stories and they have excited you so much that you want to do it too.
Yes.
And so we all start by cribbing shamelessly.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to own it, because
no, and I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's working through that allows you to find, oh, now I know what it is that is my thing, the thing that I want to write about.
Yeah. And so that actually kind of leads me into one of our listener or audience questions. And coming off of that, is there one, the audience question is from Leah Pia, and she wants to know, how and when did you discover comics and what were some of your favorites when you were a kid? And my kind of add on to that is, talking about how you're taking from different influences. Was there one you created based on, not current content, but like, I wanted to write the X-Men, so you kind of did your own stories, things like that. But so whoever wants to go first.
I think David's in a better position to be lead off batter on that one. So
well, I discovered comics at a really early age, but what I realized is that I actually discovered superheroes before I discovered comics themselves. So when I was a kid growing up, there were two shows on in syndication. One was the live action Batman show with Adam West and Burt Ward, and the other was the animated Spider-Man show from the 60s. And so that was my introduction to superheroics at a very early age. And before I could even read, my mom had bought me my first comic books, which was my first comic was a Batman comic, and I was immediately hooked because in its own way, in the mind of a 4-year-old or whatever, it was like having the TV show in my pocket. Like I could go through it, and I looked at the pictures, and that was actually, I started learning how to read by reading comics, and I was just this is the 70s, so I was like a TV junkie of a kid, watched way too much television, and so I started writing my first stories. They were pseudo comics, literally as I was learning how to write in first grade. I had two stories that I was writing. One was about a group of scientists living under the ocean in like a biosphere thing, whatever, that they kept getting attacked by sharks. And then the other was a Planet of the Apes story that was sort of a reversal. It was about a kid ape it was very much like Escape from the Planet of the Apes, when the apes come to the present day and they're the only two apes. And because that was the one that I was so fascinated with as a kid, because it was like, same as with Star Trek, why I was fascinated with Mr. Spock. I always felt like the outsider, the alien. And so that was, my Planet of the Apes story was about a kid ape stranded in first grade. So it was.
Wow.
Damn, that was,
that's pretty deep for a first grader.
Yeah, I was going to say, the nice thing about that age is that the periscope from the subconscious is so close to the surface, you see the conning tower. I mean, it's like, you don't have to dig that out. It's just like, no, this is what I'm dealing with. This is how I feel.
Yes. Yeah. No, and it's what's really funny is, as an adult, telling somebody that story when I really realized, this is what I was dealing with. And I'm telling them, and they're looking at me like going, "Oh my God,
oh, David!"
Yes.
Let me hug you. I'm
right.
Hold you. For me, because I remember watching and loving, Adam West Batman, and not understanding the camp. I was young enough that it was serious.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And Saturday morning cartoons and the Super Friends.
Super Friends.
But actual physical comics I came to relatively late compared to many of my professional peers in the industry. I remember badgering my mom to buy like the little Archie digests or the old little digest size reprints of, say, the first 5 issues of the Kirby Lee Incredible Hulk or things like that, that would be at the point of purchase, impulse buy stand, at the checkout stand at the grocery store. And every now and then she would get me like, here are the Tales of Jughead, or, here's the Incredible Hulk one. And they were fun, and I was a reader. So, reading anything was great. It was magical and I loved it. But they were comics and I didn't care. Like, they did not awaken in me a passion. I did not. I really just, okay, they were cool. My older sister is mentally retarded, and in addition to Adam West Batman and reruns at 3:30, I am of an age where I got Linda Carter Wonder Woman on TV and Bill Bixby Incredible Hulk on TV. And my sister was madly in love with the Incredible Hulk. So that was appointment viewing when we were kids. And I remember being about 10 or 11, and going into one of the very few comic book stores in the area where I'd grown up and buying a copy of the Incredible Hulk magazine. I was in 5th grade, so I don't know, I guess 10. And I remember the issue because it was shortly after 3 Mile Island. And it was literally this beautiful painted cover of the Hulk apparently fighting a nuclear reactor.
I have that issue.
Yeah. And
David's like, well, here it is.
and the backup was a Moon Knight story, and I didn't even know what that was. And they were Doug Mensch stories. I think Doug Mensch wrote them both, right?
Yeah.
And I remember buying the magazine specifically to give to my sister, and her having no interest at all. I mean, just didn't. There was no neural connection between this Incredible Hulk is the same thing as watching Bixby and Ferrigno on TV. And I remember taking it with me to school, and I know this was 5th grade because I can remember even today sitting in the classroom with the magazine open, trying to draw panels, and discovering very early on, and like I say, Walker's been putting this stuff up on his Instagram, and he was clearly, as he says in these posts, I was copying, this is Hagar the Horrible.
Yep. I
couldn't copy. I just couldn't do it. And I remember getting just really frustrated by it. And I read that thing until the cover came off it. I mean, I read it to pieces. What happened that turned me into a comic book fan was I changed schools in 8th grade, and I fell in. My new group of friends were all X-Men fans. And this was fairly early Claremont. It was about X-Men. It was Uncanny. It was post Phoenix. So it was Uncanny mid 140s.
Okay.
And
so Byrne was just leaving at that
yes. Okay. And the Miller Wolverine mini had just happened or was about to happen. And so, I wanted to be able to talk to them about this stuff. And that brought me into comic book stores. And going into comic book stores to get these things led to me discovering stuff on my own that they hadn't been reading. So, for instance, I don't know who this Matt Wagner guy is, but this is pretty cool. I mean, Grendel, and tracking down every issue of the Fish Police.
Oh wow! Oh,
that's one people don't even remember, right?
I remember Fish Police.
And and being, for some reason, the only person in that little cluster who discovered the Miller Mazzucchelli Daredevil stuff, and being able to go back and track all those down before people were willing to murder for them. And that was when it clicked for me.
Right.
Was when I sort of found them. Well, because I loved reading the X-Men to be in on it with my friends. But discovering this other stuff, that was sort of mine. And that became a thing for me. And I remember very lovingly buying bags and boards, with my carefully doled out allowance, and putting them in the boxes and so on. So.
And that's why comic book stores are so important.
Yeah,
you got to have access.
Yep. And well, I mean, in the experience, you get to meet other people, talk to people, and you get to find your way, find other content than what your friends are reading, just because, or you would have only knew X-Men, right? So,
yeah.
Sorry, David, you're going to say?
Oh, no, I was going to say, because, Greg and I are fairly close in age, and it's interesting because part of our story parallels, which was I was already hardcore into comics around the time he's talking about getting more into comics. But I was also making the discovery of the independent stuff at that point, and that was crucial. So I always tell people there's the point where I really got into comics, which was really early on, but it was around 7th, 8th grade when I discovered, well, I didn't discover it. I knew about ElfQuest because I had met the Penny at a convention before it ever even came out. But when I went into a store and saw ElfQuest, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, I met these people a couple of years ago at a convention, and it was like, that was so crucial for me because I had met the people who were making this thing, and now I could hold it in my hands, and it didn't say Marvel, it didn't say DC, and this is right around the time that the direct market was just starting to take off. And then, as Greg mentions, Matt Wagner was doing his stuff, and there was Fish Police. There was so much stuff. Howard Chaykin was doing American Flag.
Oh my God, American
appropriate.
Oh, and imagine being 14.
Yeah.
And opening up American Flag and being like, did anybody see me pick this up? I have to own this. Yeah.
And all that stuff. So it's interesting because I feel it goes in waves for a lot of us, where it's like, even for myself, I left comics for a while. I'd stopped.
So did I.
And honestly, it was the work of writers like Greg and Brian Bendis that brought me back into it. And I remember Bob Schreck telling me, Bob Schreck was at Oni at the time and was just getting started, and I'd known him for years. And he said, I'm doing this. We've started this publishing company, Oni, and we're doing some really different stuff. And I was like, yeah, nobody's doing different stuff, Bob. I'm not going to read comics anymore. I'm done.
That's right. Yeah.
And then he put a copy of Whiteout in my hand, and I went home and I opened it up and I was like, oh, wait a sec, this might be something different, and shortly thereafter, I found Powers. And I didn't even know.
Oh yeah, I love Powers.
And those two, I know it embarrasses Brian when I tell him this, but I'll say it to Greg too. It was like, it was the first time that I had read any comics that I felt like, oh, these were written by people who have some of the same influences I have, and they want this art form to grow up. Like the reason I left comics, stopped reading them, was because it wasn't growing up with me, and I was feeling really frustrated. It felt like everything was perpetually written for a 14-year-old, and now I'm in my 20s, or I was probably in my late 20s at this point, and I was like, I just can't do this. I can't. And then suddenly, oh my God, there's stuff here, and that was what brought me back into wanting to create, was this realization that because at that point, everyone was just talking about Mouse. It was like,
it was either Biff Bang Pow or it was concentration camp.
Yeah, like very serious and depressing. Yeah.
Yeah. there's a side anecdote here as we continue to digress, which is I met Brian. He doesn't remember this. I met Brian at a San Diego Comic Con shortly at, no, it might not even been San Diego. It might have been a WonderCon.
Okay.
Back when it was in
Okay.
Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Whiteout had just come out or was just starting to come out. And he was behind a table, and I went over and I picked up, I want to say it was Alias Goldfish. And the conversation was, I was engaging him as an artist as opposed to as a writer, because I was looking for an artist to collaborate with. And he was like, yeah, no. And that was like the conversation. He was like, go away. That's not my thing. But it was pretty, yeah. It's funny because I left comics when I left high school, and it wasn't a long hiatus, but it was very deliberate. It was having hit a point with the X-Men, and with the X-Men particularly, where I was like, this isn't good. This is just the same old.
Well, you outgrow
not
it.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, you outgrow it.
Well, and it was also a quality issue.
Okay.
I mean, it's not simply outgrowing it.
Okay.
It is also reaching a point where you're like, and especially at that point in the mid and early 80s, you were having a cognitive dissonance between what was going on, say, in Longbow Hunters or The Watchmen or Batman Year One,
mm-hmm.
and a whole bunch of books that were not changing at all, that were still literally filling every panel with captions of gross, overwrought third-person narration, and then filling the rest of the space with a thought balloon that was just repeating the narration in first person. It was badly done. I mean, no, it was.
I can't disagree with that.
Right. I'm like,
there was a point where you recognize this isn't good, and when you can put it next to now stuff that you know is good.
Yeah.
Right. That you put it next to what Miller and Mazzucchelli were doing, just to name one team, and they weren't the only ones. You go, well, this isn't worth my time. So I went off to college, and of course, nerd will find nerd. Nerds are like, hydrogen atoms. We swirl around and look for each other, and then we accrete. And within 3 months, my best friend in the world, I'd met him, and what do you know? He was a Star Wars fan, and I mean everything. And he played role-playing games, and we were into comics, and I remember, and I was resistant, but people were now starting to talk about, there's this guy Neil Gaiman, Sandman, and stuff like that, and I walked into, I got dragged to the comic book store at the corner of Raymond Avenue in Poughkeepsie. And it was a little store, and it was about a mile walk tops from the Vassar College campus. And I remember it being on a cold day, and I picked up this comic solely because it was a beautifully painted Sienkiewicz cover. I mean, it was a gorgeous Sienkiewicz cover. And it was Denny O'Neill's and Dennis Cohen's first issue of The Question. And that got me back. And I stayed away from Sandman for a really long time. Like, the more people who were talking about it, the less I wanted to read it. Because it was the same thing. It was like the X-Men had been.
It felt like everyone was doing it.
Well, yeah, it was. This is the thing. I had found The Question, and I was like, this is amazing. And that brought me back in, which was, a nice place to be.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think that moment more than any other is what made me want to write comics. It wasn't until then, I was almost 20 at that point, I think, 19. That was when I was like, no, I these can be written. I could do this.
Mm-hmm.
I want to try it. So
yeah, well, it's so fortunate we have such a vast work that we can choose from in comics, and there is kind of something for everybody. And so we have another question to get to, and that is from Aquatic Bird 100. And this audience member, I don't know if it's a he or she because it's Aquatic Bird. Yes, I have created and sold my Hawaii made comic books at local cons. What would be the next steps you would recommend for me to take, especially now there's not many cons?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the crucial thing. There's not many cons.
Yeah.
For me, because I've actually been thinking about this a lot and having this conversation with creators I know. It's really about upping your online presence. You know, I'm thinking probably Instagram's probably the most important from my standpoint. And just reaching out to other creators, connecting with them, and sharing your work, and fans, trying to build a fan base, and realizing that right now, um, it's like if your goal is to monetize this, forget about it. Forget about it. But if your goal is to meet other creators, meet fans, and build community, that's what's I see a lot of that going on right now. I mean, it's the fact that we are in, well, Greg and I are in the same state, but we're essentially between the three of us, we're on two opposite sides of the country in two different time zones for a convention in a third time zone. But yet we're connecting this way. And I think that there's tremendous opportunities right now. I mean, I spend a lot of time on Kickstarter, and I, because of budgetary reasons, I don't back every single project I see, but I use the campaigns to find out who the creators are. I start following those creators, following what they do. A lot of them are offering their comics initially on whether it's Webtoons or Hiveworks, stuff like that. And I mean, I've discovered some amazing stuff that way. And I'm thinking about some of my next moves is like, okay, how do I get this to, how do I just get it in front of eyes, as opposed to get people to give me, a few dollars for it. It's I think those are some of the things you have to prioritize. What are you trying to do more? And I think building and it's not just your fan base that's really crucial. It's your community, right? There's going to be your contemporaries. There's going to be other creators who become your friends and contemporaries. There's also going to be fans that you will get to know, and they can be all over the world. I just got an email from some guy that I've known for years in France who's clearly types everything up and then puts it through Google Translate, and so it doesn't make any sense to me, but it's still very sweet.
What? It's not exactly accurate?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great advice.
I think I would heed what David is saying far more than anything I would. I'm in a very weird place with regards to comics and making comics right now. And I am not as diligent as I should be in educating myself about what is current. My advice, look, first and foremost, I will say there are a couple of things I absolutely 100% agree with, because I think that building of a community, and in particular finding peers in the community, is so important. If you can find other people, and with the internet, ideally you can, who share your passion and who are in the right headspace. Because one of the problems you run into is when you're out there trying to make something, when you're trying to make art, you're always going to run into people who, for whatever reason, either because they're scared of failure or any other million reasons of insecurity, can be really toxic. So finding the community that is supportive and honest, a community that can critique and do so from a place that isn't about, that isn't a criticism that goes, oh, David, you shouldn't tell that story, you should tell this story, but is rather, David, if this is the story you are telling and you want to tell, this is where I think the problem lies. Right? You see the difference there is a crucial difference. And if you can discern that and hear that, so that's one huge part of it. This second part is simply, we live in a time where there is almost nothing that is preventing from putting your work out there. There are so many vectors by which you can give it to the world. And then it becomes the act, and it is very exhausting, depending on how much time you put into it, of trying to direct people to it so they can discover it, in the hopes that you hit that critical trigger point where now they're doing the work for you. If what you are doing is you're saying, look, I have created this comic, I have it, it's in my hand, I have a physical object here, I want to see if somebody will pay me for making more of these, or I have an idea for a new comic and I would love to see if a publisher would back it. Well, you have your first proof of proof of concept. You can do it. You have it right there. So what you do is you look for the publishers and the editors at those publishers who are doing works, not necessarily that are the same or similar to what you've done, but works that you admire and publishers you admire. And then you send them it. And you send them a letter saying, I wrote this. You don't email it. Send physical copies, right? And you send a short letter. Hi, my name is Fred. I did this story. I really like your work. I hope you enjoy it. And you want to start creating those relationships as well, because that puts you on their radar. You don't demand. You don't go in and say, I did this and therefore I should write Spider-Man. You say, I do this and I hope you enjoy it because I really have enjoyed what your work has been. And then you try to establish a relationship there. It is getting stuff, especially in this market, especially at this time. If you can get paid to get somebody to publish your work, you are absolutely winning.
Yeah.
It is very hard to do right now.
It's not an excuse to not do it.
Yeah.
Getting paid is not the reason to make comics or to write a novel or to record a song or do any of these, the passions that you feel. If it's got to get out of you, you got to get it out. I tell people, I wrote my first real comic book proposal the year I graduated high school. It was for I wanted to work for Marvel, so I wrote a proposal. I didn't get my first paid gig until I want to say 16 years later. Like that's how much I slogged it out and how much I wrote things for free and drew my own crappy comics and did all sorts of and built a career outside of the medium, because I also think that if you want to be a writer, and this is crucial, I'm not saying that you should not limit yourself. Mm-hmm. If you want to be a writer, if you want to be a storyteller.
Oh no! Punch on this one. Yeah. You got to punch on this one. This is a huge one, and I know exactly what you're saying because we agree 100% on this.
Yeah.
There are way too many people who go into an art because they love that art. You see it a hell of a lot with movies. I love movies, so I want to make movies. Yeah. And guess what? You're going to make crappy, he said, movies. All right? If you love comics and you want to make comics, that's great. But it is incumbent upon you, for instance, if you are a writer, to read short stories, to read novels, to read plays, to go to the theater, to watch things, to form your own opinions, to determine why people say this is brilliant and this is not, and then whether or not you agree with them. To read the classics, even if they bored you to tears in high school, because there's a reason that they're determined as classics, right? If all you do is read comics and want to make comics, you will make bad comics, right? And the best proof of this is find me a comic book artist, like a really good graphic storyteller, who is not also in some way a film buff or scholar.
Yeah. No,
And it is that Venn diagram is a perfect circle.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
the
It's
best
interesting.
artists are also people who will tell you who the director of photography was on this, on Donner's Superman.
Yeah.
They will be able to tell you that.
I see.
They have educated themselves as to the power of the visuals. And there is a reason why, the best writers, in my opinion, are writers who can converse not solely about the medium in which they're writing, but about the writing going on outside of it, where they can talk to you about the last novel that they read, or they can tell you why they feel this was bad or whatnot. And I am fond of saying, and David has heard me say this many times, these are not terminus driven forms. You are never going to get to a point where you know it all. And if you do, quit.
Yeah.
Right? The goal always needs to be one of improving and self-improvement. And that requires a commitment to education. You have to constantly be willing to learn and be actively trying to educate yourself.
Yep.
And it's hard.
Oh,
I say this as a guy, who's coming up on 51. I find it much harder to do these days. But it is a professional obligation. It genuinely is a professional obligation. So.
All right. Well said. Panda Baba 334 asks, what movies have inspired your work? Speaking of movies.
Inspired my work.
Or if any. Yeah.
Well, this goes, in a way, this goes directly to what Greg was talking about.
David hates movies, as you can tell by his over-the-shoulder
He
shot.
hates
So,
movies.
yeah.
Especially that Fight Club movie. And
when I was I want to say 7th grade or so, I saw Night of the Living Dead for the first time it was a Saturday afternoon on TV, and it blew my mind, right? And that began a different level of obsession with film and with George Romero in particular, and that movie in particular. And so I found every monster movie book I could find that talked about Romero, talked about that movie. I was already reading Starlog magazine, started reading Fangoria, and I really immersed myself in the study of this one particular film and this one particular filmmaker, because we'll say I was 13, 14 years old. There's something about it that just resonated with me so much. And
might have been some representation.
It was a huge part of it was representation, and it was also the fact that it was one of the first times I was watching a movie where I was like, oh, this is about more than what's on the screen. This is there's something, and back then I didn't understand, whatever, metaphor or multi-laying your story. I just know that this thing hit me in the face like a ton of bricks. And to this day, like, I always say, okay, well, what's my Romero angle from this? Because Night of the Living Dead specifically, but some of his other films were never about they weren't about zombies coming back and taking over the world, right? There's more to it. And so that one film was the thing that opened my mind both creatively but critically, and I'll say academically or scholarly. It was like, I can't emphasize enough how much that movie changed my life. And when I teach, I tell my students, like, find that novel or find that movie that does that for you, and then understand everything about it. Understand, like, every book I could find, and I have them. There's a shelf back here on Romero. Tons of books on him, on zombie movies, and I don't really care about zombie movies. I just care about this guy and what his influences were, but that passion then led to other filmmakers, right? So then it was like, when I saw my first Billy Wilder movie and was like, what is this? I start reading about Billy Wilder. Then when I see my first Kurosawa movie, and I understood the process of how to dig deep. And I do the same thing with comics. I do the same thing with literature, where it's like, once I discover something, it's like, I want to know more about this person. I want to know who their influences were. And so I unfortunately, I'm not doing it as much as I used to, but I still do it from time to time. And my big deep dive recently is I've been going back through the comics of Gil Kane and Bernard Krigstein, and I'm just really studying them as artists.
Wow. Okay. See, so that's scholarly work. I wish I could. I wish I could have an answer that's as good as that. I think there are probably two movies that in one way or another are responsible for sort of trajectory for me. I remember seeing Thunderball on television in a hotel room when I was like 7 or 8. And hi, welcome to the world of super spies, right? When I was in high school, I actually took an elective on film. I was taught by a history teacher at the school I went to, and he was a film buff, not so much a film scholar, but he was trying, right? So we did a lot of Hitchcock and things like that, and somewhere in there I had, Raiders had come out in 1981, and I had loved the movie. And I sort of went back to Raiders of the Lost Ark and started looking at it again and realized that it was actually genius. That when you talk about Romero saying, the zombies are not, we're not talking about zombies here. Mm-hmm. Raiders is not talking about the Lost Ark. That movie is about something very different. And that was, in the same way that David describes, revelatory for me as an artist. That and frankly fed directly into something that I have believed ever since and believe to this day, which is, I don't care what you are trying to do with your story. Meaning that if you want it to be just entertainment, that's fine. You can tell yourself that. But anything you're putting out in the world, you're making a statement about the world, and you need to be responsible about it. And the best works are works that embrace that. The best works are works that say, yes, we are telling this story, and it is about this plot, but it is also about something else that we are not overtly discussing. And you've got to carry that awareness with you in everything you create. And I don't care if it's a silly sitcom about 3 Dobermans, or if it's Twin Peaks, which is going, oh, we are so about something you can't even figure it out. Right?
That one's way over my head. I'm going to I couldn't
so, and I suppose the addendum to this is, we're talking about film, but I can remember watching the original, I can't believe I have to say that, the original Prisoner series that Patrick McGowan did, which is entirely allegorical.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all allegory. That's all it is. Dressed up in Prison for Spies. And to this day, to me, is one of the most effective threading of that particular needle, because every single episode up until the last two are pretty much clearly plot driven, but they never ever lose their true north about what they're talking about.
Okay. Chopin 334 asks,
I love these names.
I do too. We all could use a good laugh because these are challenging times. What comedies or comedians do you recommend?
Letterkenny. I love Letterkenny. It is crude and shameless, and one of the funniest, wittiest things I have seen in years and years. And the wordplay on that show is so good, I have to watch it with the subtitles on because I miss easily 50% of the puns. So yeah.
Because I haven't watched it yet.
I know.
I
Right?
love Letterkenny. The very first episode, not their best, because they're still trying to find their legs.
Yeah, you can't always judge by the pilots, you know.
But seriously, coming off of that one and moving, it is delightful, and I love almost everything about that show.
Awesome.
And proof again that you can do things that are of quality and of great success without having to do it the way everybody else did, because the people who made that show did it absolutely not wanting to play with Hollywood.
Yeah.
I mean, they absolutely were like, we're not doing that. And yeah, there are some dips in it, but oh my God, I love that show. It just cracks me the hell up. And then you want something that isn't the same funny, but is just will make you happy. If you haven't encountered this. When my son got back home from when the quarantine came down, and the poor guy was trapped here with his parents for 6 months, which no 20-year-old ever wants. He introduced us to Steven Universe.
Oh.
And that was a family watch, and it is sweet and gleeful and unapologetic, and I love it.
Lovely.
So I thoroughly endorse Steven Universe.
Excellent.
Yeah. So there you go.
David?
For me, I've actually just today was watching some old Looney Tunes cartoons, some old Daffy Duck stuff. Initially started for research purposes, and I got so into it, and I remembered how much I love Daffy Duck, especially, but Looney Tunes. And I'm a big fan of Key and Peele, so most of their sketches are on YouTube, so you can watch them all the time. And I will frequently, I've never gotten tired of Key and Peele, and to me, I grew up watching Saturday Night Live. I watched SCTV. I watched In Living Color. I watched Chappelle. So that sketch comedy model has been something I grew up with and I've loved for a long time. But to me, Key and Peele have perfected it. Like, I love all the other stuff, but they've stood on the shoulders of all these others, and I'm waiting to see what comes next. Who does the next thing? So I love that. I'm getting ready to sit back and rewatch Fleabag, which is not everybody's cup of tea, but I absolutely loved Fleabag. But there's times where it's not funny, and I happen to be the sort of person who likes my humor to be laced with extreme tragedy or darkness or whatever. So I think that's why Fleabag appeals to me so much.
It's that British humor, and
yeah. But
performances are super great in that too. So you can't. They're amazing. Yeah.
And I go back to a lot of old stuff. I mean, I laugh at Young Frankenstein every single time. I laugh at there's certain comedies that I go to regularly, but Young Frankenstein is it.
I don't think I ever laughed as hard up until that point is when I first saw Young Frankenstein. I remember watching it with my little brother on videotape, and the whole dining room sequence and the and that sequence all the way through Sedagive. I never. That was one of the first times I saw something that made me laugh so hard my jaws hurt.
Yep.
You know that one where you just can't stop, and it's like, oh God, I have to stop laughing now. Yeah.
I just watched that.
I was a Mel Brooks fan forever after that. Yeah.
Anything Mel Brooks, I'm with you there. Yeah, the classics. Greg and I have talked about this on the show because we've literally been talking every week since quarantine. And sometimes you just want what you already, it's a guaranteed funny. You love it. It's comfortable. And that's why going back to classics is such a smart move. But yes, we just, my husband and I were like, we don't want to be disappointed at this point. We don't want to watch something and be like, oh, we wasted an hour. I'd rather have something I feel good about and I know I need it, and that's it. All right. So let's try
I'm not in the mood to take risks.
Right. I'm not. Yes. Yeah. Low risk on the TV bar. But okay, we're gonna try to get through a few more. This is from, you're gonna love this name, Zit Baby 3000.
Okay, I don't think these are real.
I promise. Do you prefer writing heroes or villains?
I think writing villains is really hard.
Writing villains is incredibly difficult.
It's much easier for me personally to write heroes. And it's funny, I was talking to Rick Burchett yesterday about aspirational heroes and the need for them and the lack thereof of them. But I find it much easier to write a character who is trying to do the right thing because it is the right thing to do than to write a villain whose pathology I understand. Because to write a villain well, you have to take them, you have to understand at what point did they break.
Yeah.
And at what point did the absolutely unacceptable behavior become reasonable to them, right? And if you're doing that well, you have to do it honestly. And if you're doing it honestly, that means that you've got to get to a really dark place that can justify horrible crimes. I mean, if you're talking about somebody who's murdering somebody, right? You're talking about the deliberate theft of another individual's life. And a villain is not the same as somebody who is unfortunately in situations, right? A villain is somebody who is like, no, I am doing these things deliberately, right? It's not, I did it accidentally. I find it incredibly challenging to write a very good villain.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's funny because when Bendis and I were working on Naomi together, even before that, I had this theory of like, wouldn't it be interesting if you could write a really compelling story without a villain, with no antagonist at all? And really that's my cop out, because it was like, it's that hard, right? So I remember we were having these early meetings about Naomi, and I was like, well, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if we just totally threw out everything that's worked for centuries and just said, there's not going to be a bad guy? And he just looked at me and he went, no, that's not going to. And I was like, what do you mean? And then it was like, then I heard my own voice saying what I was saying. Oh yeah, you're right. That isn't going to work.
Oh yes, I'm trying to run away from the problem as opposed to
that's exactly what it is. No, I agree with everything Greg said, and for me, the three things that are always the hardest for me are names, titles, and villains.
Mm-hmm.
And I will usually not get too deep into any of that until after the first draft is done, and then I can look at it and go, okay, here's a spot where my hero can face a challenge. How can he be challenged? How can she be challenged? And then from there the villain starts to come together. But I frequently will leave that until second draft.
I don't have a problem with titles for the most part. The title tends to suggest itself to me fairly quickly once I know what it is I'm writing about. It may be the wrong title, but I will have a working title for it. Names I actually have a whole bunch of tricks for. So names pose a much less of a problem than they used to for me. A villain's pathology is always a frickin' nightmare.
Oh, it's
just because there's a point where they go off the map, and you've got to be like, normal, reasonable people wouldn't act that way.
Yeah.
You know, and then you have to be like, well, you are saying this is not a reasonable person, but how do they get there in their head where they go, to them it is not only reasonable but necessary behavior? You know.
Yeah, and we actually have gone into it pretty lengthily in one of our podcasts before. But I was going to say, you know, you guys both said you have to do things for research. But I mean, when you go to write a villain, it's not like you're going to go out and murder someone or actually try to really like do all these crazy things. So I would imagine that is even harder also in terms of research and trying to get into that place. So
when I'm working on real world stuff, I did a novel called Walking Dead that is about human trafficking, and I did a lot of research on it, and that was damaging research. I mean, there's no way for me to describe it, and it's not a woe is me. I just know that, that was not learning how to ride a motorcycle. That was me doing some digging around into some really foul corners of the planet and the internet, and coming away from it being like, I think I'm going to be sick. And you can't forget things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's a price you pay depending on where you want to go.
Yeah, which is why you guys need a vacation after each big project.
Yeah, preferably in Hawaii.
In Hawaii, obviously. Yeah. So, all right, last two quick ones. Whitney 93545. I miss Comic Cons and getting autographs. How can fans do that now?
Oh, I don't know. Just take a Sharpie and, as you said earlier, put on your thinking cap. And channel me.
There's been a lot of auctions, and you guys have done a lot of Creators for Comics. There's been a lot of fundraising things I've seen. I
had a retailer reach out to me about like doing a virtual event where you could do something like Zoom, or similar, where people could live chat in, and then you could actually, like, they would send you the books so you could sign for them and then send the books back to the retailer, and then they would send them.
Okay.
It isn't the most cost-effective way to do it, unfortunately. Yeah. That is one way. But the other is, be patient, because we will get through this.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not going to just go away when it gets cold.
No.
But we are going to get through this. There will one day be a future civilization where we're all allowed to be in the same places again.
Yes. So hold on to your comics, keep them nice.
Yeah.
And
so
creators will be back.
And come on, that's going to be such a wonderful day.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be a wonderful day for everybody on both sides of that table. So don't lose that faith at all.
That is a day we all look forward to. So final thing, because we do have to wrap up, is from the comic, the staff actually wanted to know, will we be seeing any movies or TV series based on your comics, or any more in in Greg's
case.
Or
Mr. Home Run.
which, of course, I'm sure our listeners know. Obviously, Stumptown was recently on, and then The Old Guard on Netflix.
Not anymore. It just got canceled.
Well, but
So.
it could still pop up. But there's still a wonderful season online that you can see. And, of course, The Old Guard. But they want to know what else is in the works.
Yeah,
visually.
no, this is David.
Well,
what can you talk about? See, this is the problem with this
here's
question.
The problem.
Is you never want to talk about the thing that is still vaporware.
Yeah.
Right.
It's got to be like in production. But yes, or whatever you're comfortable sharing,
or
of
in
course.
Development. Well, Bitterroot is in active development, as they say. Legendary has it right now. It's over at Legendary. Ryan Coogler is attached to produce, and they've just commissioned another screenplay. The first one didn't quite work out. We were all really excited, and then and I think part of the problem was the writer that they got didn't really understand the adaptation process, which is another subject altogether. And the Legendary is really, really excited about it, and as terrible as the pandemic has been, one of the positive things was that because the way it slowed production down, it's given the Bitterroot production really more time to focus on story and focus on building up. There's been more communication between the comic team and the film people. So I think that's all I can talk about. There's a couple other things that may or may not be happening. Mm-hmm. There'll be meetings this week, and but I just was talking to someone the other day about how I'll put this out there. I called somebody and said, "Hey, how hard would it be for me to learn how to do animation on my own?" And they were like, "Yeah, you've got too much stuff on your plate.
Yeah, you're high.
I'll do the animation for you." So I'm exploring going back to the influences of like the simple animation of a show like, say, South Park. So I'm looking at trying to do something, because I also cannot sit around and wait for anyone to make my stuff for me.
Simple's not easy, though.
No, I know.
Doesn't mean easy.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Wow.
That's
so
awesome.
You just don't want to sleep, is what you're saying.
Right.
And that's part of it. And just because when I slow down and I have to face reality, then reality becomes too much. So it's like,
can't sleep. Clowns will get me. So
yes,
exactly. Keep busy. Yeah. Okay. Well, anything to add to that, Greg?
There's a whole lot of stuff in various stages right now.
We'll just tell people to keep listening to Culture Chat, because we talk about.
Yeah, there's a whole lot that's.
Enough said.
I can't say even if I wanted to.
Of course. So yes, no, I will tell our audience.
I hate them.
Yeah. No, not at all. It's awesome. That way they can keep listening, and they'll keep up with all of your work. So thank you so much to Aaron Yamasato and Kauai Comic Con for having us on. Yes, we're so super psyched. And Culture Chat, as always, is super, super grateful to both of you. Thank you, David and Greg, for being here, spending time with me on a Sunday to record this for this lovely Hawaii convention. So it's always wonderful to see both of you and learn so much from you both. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Aloha. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com, or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.